Nate had recently been promoted to the manager's seat at a busy company office. It should have been a chance to help the company grow and build stronger teamwork. But instead of bringing improvement, Nate brought fear. He was not just strict. He was cold and greedy. The very first thing Nate did was shocking. He decided to cut everyone's salaries, except his own. This caused panic among the workers. Many of the best and brightest employees handed in their resignation letters right away. Others wanted to quit too, but they couldn't. They had families to feed, bills to pay, and no other jobs waiting for them. So they stayed, silently suffering. As days passed, the mood in the office turned heavy. The work didn't get lighter. No, it became worse. With half the staff gone, the people who remained had to do twice as much work. Late nights became normal. Smiles became rare. The office was once a cheerful place, but now it felt like a prison run by a ruthless warden. Even the janitor, a quiet, hard-working woman, left. Her salary had already been low. After the cut, it became impossible for her to survive. So she walked away with nothing, leaving behind an office that slowly turned dirty and dusty without her care. Now there was no one to mop the floors, clean the bathrooms, or dust the windows. But Nate still refused to increase the pay for the janitor position. Every morning, during meetings, he would loudly complain, "This place is disgusting. Look at the dust. Look at the windows. What is HR doing?" Mrs. Bennett, the kind-hearted HR manager, had tried her best. She talked to Nate, begged him to offer even a little more for the janitor's pay. But Nate wouldn't listen. He called it wasting money and mocked her efforts. Still, every morning she listened to him shout. She sat there, silently, hiding her stress behind a forced smile. After meetings, she would return to her office, sit down quietly, and take anti-anxiety pills just to make it through the day. Then, one morning, something unusual happened. As usual, Nate was yelling at the staff during the morning meeting. He shouted about dusty chairs and messy desks. He blamed everyone except himself. He stood near the large office window, still ranting, when something caught his eye. Outside, near the garbage bins, a young woman was stacking flattened cardboard boxes. She was dressed in oversized, worn clothes. Her shoes looked too big for her feet, but she was neat. Her hair was tied back in a bun, and she moved with care and focus, arranging the boxes like puzzle pieces. Nate stared at her, then smirked. He turned to Mrs. Bennett and said, "You said nobody wants to work here for that salary. Watch this." He opened the window wide and shouted, "Hey, you, come here. I've got a job for you." But the woman didn't even flinch. She kept stacking boxes, calmly and silently. Confused, Nate shouted again, louder, "You want money, right? Come here. I'm offering you something better." Still, she didn't respond, not even a glance. Nate frowned, then waved to the security guard. "Bring that girl here." "Yes, the one by the garbage bins." "Now." The guard rushed outside. Minutes later, the girl entered the office. She stood there quietly, not looking scared or shy, just calm. Nate tried to speak to her, but she didn't reply. Then they realized she was deaf. She wore a small hearing aid, but it seemed weak, possibly broken. Still, up close, She looked nothing like what Nate had assumed. Her hands were clean, her skin soft, and her eyes sharp. She was poor, yes, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her clothes were old, but washed. She looked like someone who had known suffering and had survived. Nate remembered that deaf people could read lips, so he began speaking slowly, exaggerating every syllable. "Do you want a job?" he said. The girl looked at him. Then she nodded. "You'll just clean," he added. "Nothing hard." She nodded again. That was all Nate needed to see. He turned proudly to Mrs. Bennet. "See, you just don't know how to hire people. That girl will work for even less money." Mrs. Bennet said nothing, but her eyes, tired and full of pain, told a different story. Nate had no idea what he had just invited into the building. Lauren started working the very next day. She arrived at the office early, sometimes even before the sun rose. Most days, she was the first person to step inside the building. Quietly, without waiting for instructions, she picked up the mop, the broom, and the rag. She moved through the office like a gentle breeze, never rushing, never missing a corner. Every desk was wiped, every floor spotless, and every doorknob polished. Within a week, the office that once looked forgotten began to shine again. The glass walls were so clean you could see your reflection. The air even smelled better. But though her hands worked hard, her heart had to work harder, because kindness was rare in this place. Lauren's quietness confused many. Some of her co-workers didn't understand her silence. Some saw it as weakness. Others mocked it. And because she couldn't hear well, they thought it was funny to laugh at her behind her back. Sometimes they whispered things just loud enough for her to catch pieces of it with her poor hearing aid, calling her charity case, or the window girl, or worse. They'd giggle and mimic her when she walked past. And while she didn't always hear everything, she could feel the energy, sharp, cold, and cruel. But Lauren never responded. Not once. She held her head high and kept working. She smiled when no one smiled at her. She picked up trash others threw on the ground in front of her. She scrubbed the lunchroom table after everyone left their crumbs and empty cups behind, even when someone spilled coffee on purpose just to watch her clean. She said nothing. You see, Lauren had been through worse. At night, she walked back to the edge of the town, where she lived in an old abandoned shack. The windows were cracked. The roof leaked when it rained, but it was home, and she wasn't alone. Inside that tiny space, Lauren had her family, though not the kind you might expect. She had taken in several stray animals, 3 kittens who had been left in a box, a cat with a missing ear, 2 dogs that had been wandering the streets, and even a parrot with a broken foot who couldn't fly anymore. She fed them every day, even when she had nothing for herself. Sometimes her dinner was just a piece of bread and some water, but her pets, they had warm food, soft places to sleep, and love, endless love. Their soft purrs, wagging tails, and gentle chirps were her reward at the end of each hard day. Lauren had lost everything once before, but she had rebuilt her life with her own hands. And though her body was tired and her hearing was faint, her soul was strong. Back at the office, Mrs. Bennet watched Lauren quietly. She noticed how clean the office had become. She saw the difference between Lauren's silent strength and the noise of those who mocked her. And still, Nate, the manager, showed no appreciation. He never thanked her, never said a kind word. In fact, he often made sour remarks. "What does she even do all day?" he grumbled. "The office is still dusty, even when it clearly wasn't." He seemed to enjoy picking at her work, never giving credit where it was due. But something unexpected was beginning to shift. The same co-workers, who once laughed at her, began to notice things. They noticed how Lauren never snapped back. They noticed how her eyes always stayed calm, even when someone was cruel. They noticed how she did the jobs no one else wanted to do, with grace. They noticed that even without speaking much, she had something deep about her, something wise, something steady, something kind. Some began to lower their eyes when she walked past. Others stopped their jokes. A few even started to feel ashamed. Because slowly, without saying a word, Lauren was teaching them something. She was showing them that you don't need a loud voice to be strong. You don't need to fight back to win respect. And sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the deepest scars and the brightest light. Lauren, the girl hired as a joke, had already begun to change the heart of the office. One silent act of kindness at a time. Lauren was still doing the same job every day, cleaning floors, washing windows, and wiping desks. But something had started to shift inside the office. Though she still wore second-hand clothes and walked quietly through the hallways, her presence had become hard to ignore. She never raised her voice, never joined in any gossip, and never defended herself. But her soft eyes, calm expression, and gentle behavior began to speak louder than words. One by one, people started noticing her. Some of the co-workers who had once whispered cruel things about her now watched her in silence. They saw that she was always focused, always on time, and always humble. Even though she had every reason to be bitter, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Slowly the cruel jokes stopped, the giggles faded, and respect began to replace laughter. Mrs. Bennet, the HR manager, had long admired Lauren's hard work, but now she felt something deeper, curiosity. There was something special about this girl. Something unspoken, something hidden. Even Nate, the arrogant manager, started to act differently. He didn't praise her, but he also didn't insult her as often. Perhaps he was confused by her calmness, or maybe he was too distracted by other problems. You see, the company's performance was getting worse. Clients were leaving, projects were delayed, profits were falling. The office, once known for being strong and efficient, was becoming weak and chaotic. Nate's answer: blame others, shout louder, fire more people. Each morning he called long, exhausting meetings. He accused employees of being lazy. He threatened to replace anyone who didn't give 200%. The pressure was rising, and fear filled the air, like smoke in a burning house. People were quitting again, this time quietly. No goodbye parties, no farewell emails, just a growing number of empty desks. Whispers began to spread. Maybe Nate won't last long. Even the CEO has started visiting more often. He's ruined everything. And it was true. The company's founder and CEO, Mr. Nolan, had started coming more frequently. He had built the company from the ground up. It wasn't just a business to him. It was his life's work. And now, one branch was falling apart. Nolan noticed something strange during his visits. On the surface, everything looked fine. The reports were neat, the desks were clean, the smiles were practiced. But there was something missing. The warmth, the honesty, the soul of the place. Then one day, Nolan made a quiet decision. He gathered the employees and said, "This office needs a deep cleaning, from top to bottom. So I'm giving everyone a paid day off tomorrow. No one is allowed to come in." People cheered. Even Nate smiled, thinking it was just a break. But while the office was empty, Nolan did something unexpected. He installed small surveillance cameras in hidden corners, not to spy, but to learn the truth. He wanted to know what really went on when he wasn't watching. And so, for the next few weeks, Nolan spent his days in his home office, watching the live feeds. He saw tired faces. He saw disrespect. He saw a manager who did nothing but yell, but then he saw something that surprised him. Late at night, after everyone had left, one figure remained in the office. It was Lauren, but she wasn't cleaning. She was sitting at Nate's desk, completely focused, with papers spread out in front of her. She was writing, drawing, creating charts and graphs with beautiful precision. Her handwriting was elegant. Her thoughts were clear. Her ideas were brilliant. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a thinker, a planner, a leader. Nolan's eyes widened as he watched the footage. This girl, this so-called beggar, had the mind of a professional. She worked with care, with vision, and with purpose, and she did it quietly. The next day, Nolan received a formal business proposal from Nate, a plan to improve the company's performance. It was smart, detailed, impressive, but one thing stood out: the handwriting. It was the same handwriting he had seen in the footage the night before. Lauren's handwriting. That was the moment Nolan knew. Someone was lying, and someone was hiding, but not for long. After watching the secret camera footage, Mr. Nolan couldn't believe what he had seen. The same girl Nate had dragged in from the street and mocked was now sitting alone at night, organizing reports, drawing business strategies, and designing marketing plans, as if she were born to do it. Lauren wasn't just cleaning the office. She was quietly solving the very problems Nate had created. Nolan sat in his home office, stunned. The more he watched, the more clear it became. Lauren was the real brain in the building. And Nate? Nate had stolen her work and tried to pass off as his own. The final piece of proof came the next morning. Nolan received a report titled Branch Recovery Strategy from Nate. It was detailed, professional, and full of clear ideas. But there was one thing Nate didn't think about: handwriting. The notes were in neat, elegant handwriting. Nolan had seen Nate's writing before. Messy, rushed, barely readable. This wasn't his. So who had really written it? That same evening, Nolan went back and checked the video footage again. And there it was. Lauren sitting at Nate's desk, late at night, quietly working with full focus. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a truth that couldn't stay hidden anymore. The next day, Nolan called Nate into his office. Nate walked him in, pretending to be confident. But the moment he saw Nolan's serious expression, his smile faded. "I've reviewed your proposal," Nolan began. Nate smiled proudly. "Yes, sir. I worked hard on that. I even stayed up late all week." "Really?" Nolan interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Because the handwriting doesn't match yours. And I've seen footage of someone else doing the work." Nate's eyes widened. Nolan didn't stop. "You lied. You faked your way through everything. And worst of all, you disrespected someone who gave more to this company than you ever did." Nate began to stutter, trying to explain. But Nolan had heard enough. "You have 10 minutes to pack your things," he said. "You're fired." Nate stood frozen, pale and speechless, as he slowly walked out of the office he once ruled with pride. The staff peeked from behind their desks, whispering as the arrogant manager carried his box of belongings out the door. But that wasn't the end of the day's surprises. "Call Lauren in," Nolan told his secretary. The room went quiet. "The cleaner? Why?" Lauren walked into the office shyly. Unsure of what was happening, she sat down across from Nolan, her eyes wide, with confusion. He smiled gently and signed to her, knowing she could read lips as well. "I want to know more about you." She looked down, a little nervous, but then she began to speak, and for the first time, someone really listened. Lauren told her story of growing up in a poor home, filled with shouting and alcohol, of studying quietly in abandoned places because her house was too noisy to focus, of sneaking out to school with her books while her parents still slept. She talked about her dream to become a businesswoman, her top grades, and how her teachers once believed she would change the world. And then she spoke of Connor, the boy she loved, the boy she lost in a car crash just days before their wedding. Lauren's voice trembled as she told Nolan how that crash stole more than her fiancé. It took her hearing too. The doctors couldn't explain it. They said it was stress. All she knew was that her world became silent after that day. And Connor's wealthy parents, they blamed her for everything. His mother even screamed that Lauren would be nothing more than a janitor, that she would suffer for the rest of her life. Now, years later, Lauren had been cleaning floors in silence. But she hadn't forgotten her education, or her dreams, or her worth. She had just been waiting for someone to see her, and finally someone had. As Lauren finished her story, Nolan sat silently, moved to the core. He had built his company with sweat and passion, but never had he imagined that a quiet cleaner in worn-out clothes could be the very soul his office had been missing. He looked at her, not with pity, but with deep respect. "You're not just smart," he said gently. "You're a leader. You've gone through more than most people ever will, and you're still standing." Lauren looked down, unsure of what to say. She had never expected to be noticed, much less praised. Then Nolan leaned forward and asked, "Will you accept the position of executive director of this branch?" Lauren froze. The room seemed to spin for a second. Me?" she whispered, almost afraid it was a joke. "Yes, you." Nolan replied with a warm smile. You've already been doing the hard part, fixing the problems. It's time you're given the role and respect you deserve. Her lips trembled and her eyes welled up. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, she felt something rise in her chest. Hope. That day, the office transformed. Employees gathered as Nolan made the announcement. Lauren was the new director. People gasped. Some stared in disbelief. But Nolan stood firmly beside her, proud and confident. It took time, but one by one, the staff began to understand why she had been chosen. She was not just another face. They realized she had already been leading silently through example, with grace and strength. And Lauren? She didn't change. She didn't wear fancy suits or speak in loud meetings. She still arrived early, smiled softly, and listened more than she spoke. But her ideas were sharp, her decisions wise, and her heart full of care, and the branch, it flourished. Profits rose, clients returned, the work environment became peaceful. Nolan visited often, not just to check progress, but to be near Lauren. Slowly something beautiful began to bloom between them. They started having lunch together. Sometimes they'd talk about business, but mostly they shared stories of dreams, of pain, of hope. Nolan was drawn to her, not just because she was brilliant, but because she was real, humble, brave, gentle. And Lauren, for the first time since Connor's death, she let herself feel something again. Not guilt, not sadness, but love. They grew close. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't loud. But it was sincere. People began to notice. The way Nolan's eyes followed her, the way her smile returned whenever he was near. Months passed. One day, Nolan quietly proposed. There were no cameras, no big speech, just a handwritten note on her desk that read, "Would you let me be your new beginning?" And underneath it, a ring. Lauren said, yes. They married in a simple ceremony. No luxury, just love. The woman who once lived in a broken shack now walked into her future with confidence and calm. But Nolan wasn't done surprising her. One sunny afternoon, he entered her office with a large folder in his hand. "Come with me," he said. Outside, a car waited. It took them to a quiet piece of land near the edge of town. There stood a small building with flowers by the gate. A sign above the door read, "Lauren's Shelter for Strays." It was a gift. Inside were all her rescued animals, safe, cared for, and happy. Each had their own little space, warmth, food, and love. Tears filled Lauren's eyes. "You gave everything you had for them," Nolan said. "Now they'll always have everything they need." That evening, they returned to their peaceful home. Laughter filled the halls. There were no harsh words, no more silence filled with pain. There was love, healing, peace. And then one more miracle happened. One morning, Lauren woke up and heard birds, real clear bird song. She rushed outside, tears falling freely. Her hearing had returned. Doctors couldn't explain it. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was life giving back what pain had once taken. All anyone knew was the girl hired as a joke had become the woman everyone admired. Lauren stood in the garden of her new home, eyes closed, listening to something she thought she would never hear again. birds singing. For years, silence had been her companion. After the tragic accident that took her fiancé and her hearing, life had become a quiet storm. She had learned to live without sound, to understand people through their lips, their eyes, their emotions. But now, as the soft chirping of birds filled the air around her, she felt something powerful, a miracle. Her hearing had returned. Just like that, doctors had no explanation. They examined her ears, ran tests, and looked at reports. All they could say was, "We don't know how this happened." But Lauren didn't need science to tell her what she already believed. Love heals. Her life had changed in every way. She was no longer the quiet cleaner who scrubbed the floors of an unkind office. She was now the respected executive director of a company branch that was thriving under her care. The same workers who once mocked her now admired her deeply. They came to her for advice, followed her lead, and trusted her wisdom. She wasn't just good at business. She was good at people. She led with heart, not ego. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, people listened because every word mattered. Her relationship with Nolan, the company's founder, had grown from simple friendship to something deep and unshakable. He saw her pain, her strength, her brilliance. He never looked at her as someone less because of her past. He saw her as whole. Their marriage wasn't built on grand gestures or wealth. It was built on quiet understanding, gentle laughter, and small daily kindnesses. True love. Lauren didn't forget where she came from. She still visited the old shack where she once lived, not to cry over the past, but to remember how far she had come. She still fed the strays in the area and helped local children who reminded her of her younger self. Lost, quiet, but full of potential. She and Nolan often spent time at Lauren's shelter for strays, the animal home he gifted her. It wasn't just a place for animals. It was a symbol of second chances. Every dog, cat, or bird there had been abandoned, forgotten, or broken. But here, they were safe, loved, and healed, just like Lauren. As the seasons passed, another joy entered their lives. A baby boy. When Lauren found out she was pregnant, she held her belly with tears in her eyes. After all she had lost, life was giving her something new to hold, to protect, to love. Nolan was overjoyed. He read parenting books, painted the nursery himself, and made late-night snacks for her, even before she asked. The house was full of warmth, laughter, and love. A real home, and through it all, Lauren stayed humble. She never bragged, never gloated, and never forgot those hard days, because they had shaped her. The pain had made her gentle. The silence had made her strong. One evening, as she sat on the porch holding her baby, Nolan sat beside her and asked, "Do you remember the day I found you by the window?" Lauren smiled. "I do. I thought you were just another man with power." "And now?" he asked. "You're the man who gave me back my voice," she whispered. "Not the one in my throat, but the one in my heart." He reached for her hand. "And you're the woman who reminded me what this company and life should be about. Not money, not power, but people, stories, second chances." Their son cooed in her arms as the sun set behind them. The sky turned golden. The birds sang again. Lauren closed her eyes and listened, not just to the sound, but to the feeling of being completely whole. The girl who was once hired as a joke had become a leader, a wife, a mother, and a beacon of hope. She was living proof that one kind chance can change everything.